Hello guys, welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to read you a spooky tale from the No Sleep subreddit, and this tale is called My Daughter Had Her Wisdom Teeth Removed and the Anesthesia Made Her Admit Something Terrifying. This was written by The Eagle Strikes, called the best single part story of 2023, so shout out to The Eagle Strikes. Because I really liked this tale, and I hope that you guys will as well. So here we go. I, 37F, have a son, 12, male, who I'll call Nathan, and a daughter, 14F, who I'll call Anna. A couple of months ago, I took Anna to a private hospital for a procedure to have 4 of her wisdom teeth extracted, teeth that were unfortunately well embroidered in her gums, necessitating the use of a general anesthetics. The doctor explained that it would be a lengthy procedure. Local anesthesia just wouldn't cut it. Anna wasn't best pleased about that, and neither was I. Now, nobody who's seen the aftermath of such sedation, whether in reality or from a sadistic filmmaking YouTube parents, knows that it often leads to wonky, witty remarks. Though I didn't personally have a recording phone at the ready, I'll admit that I was hoping for some bizarre wordplay after the procedure. Instead, my daughter uttered something wild. Before I repeat her confession, I need to give you some context. My husband Ed used to go whitewater rafting with our 2 children and his brother Darren. Some years I'd go with them, but work commitments often clashed. Anyway, Ed wasn't a particularly strong swimmer, so I always felt a little uneasy about the idea of him reaching out on such unforgiving water without me. And in late 2022, my worst fear came true. A strong current pulled my husband under, and by the time Darren had recovered his body, it was too late. Ed drowned. The following months were awful, but Anna changed the most severely. To eke even a handful of words out of her became a rarity. But that didn't stop Uncle Darren from trying, from helping the family to heal in the wake of Ed's passing. It was no surprise to me when he offered to come to the hospital with us, keep Nathan company whilst Anna endured her lengthy procedures. So, around 11 in the evening, using a pinky toys and a sweet bang out of her rolling eye. "How are you feeling?" Anna's doped-up face observed me absently, but within the teary pools of her wandering eyes, there swam thoughts, loose, disconnected thoughts, but thoughts that still meant something. And when she opened her mouth to speak, 2 wads of tissue spilled from her puffy cheeks. "The house looks empty," Anna said in a half muffle, wafting both of her hands at the right-hand side of the hospital room, which was an unlit space lined with empty beds. "We're not at our house, sweet pea. We're in the recovery room," I explained, poking a slight gap between the overflowing tissue so I could hear her more clearly. "This is a hospital, remember, and you've gotten this massive space all to yourself, so I suppose it does seem quite empty." Anna mumbled something incoherent. "You've had your teeth removed," I continued, "and you're going to feel a little out of it whilst the drugs wear off, honey." "Where's the man?" my daughter asked in a low, disoriented moan. I smiled. "Dr. Addis? He's doing the rounds, but the nurse is here. Joyce, remember her from earlier?" The young nurse, fiddling with various instruments on her trolley, looked up and beamed. "Hello again, Anna. Everything went well, and you're being really brave. I'm going to run a few tests now, then we'll give you an oxygen mask to get you back into fighting shape. Make sure you tell me if you feel any pain or sickness, okay? It will. No, Anna groaned. The man. She must mean Miss Dr. Addis, Joyce giggled. I looked at nurse apologetically. Sorry. The woman grinned widely and shook her head. Don't be silly, Mrs. Carey. I'm only teasing. Anna, I'm sure Dr. Addis will be back soon. But the man, Anna insisted loudly. Nathan didn't see. Sweetie, I began. Then my daughter's wide eyes shot to me, and she slurred her wretched confession. Dad didn't drown. Don't tell Mom, he says. He'll kill us if I tell Mom. There followed silence. A special silence which pressed heavily on the skin, weighing both Joyce and me to the floor. The nurse clearly felt something in Anna's word, something more than drug-induced nonsense. Where is the man? My daughter whispered, and I finally understood that she was not talking about Dr. Addis. Uncle Darren and Nathan were sitting in the corridor. That horrifying thought circled my mind as I processed what Anna said. A string of supposedly drug-induced words. That was what any rational person would believe, or at the very least, want to believe. But a memory came to the forefront of my mind. Christmas Day, 2023. Darren made a pass at me. Gin and hormones, Cynthia, he sheepishly promised after I spurned him. That was all. I chose to accept that explanation, given that our entire family had already been through so much, but it never sat well with me. Even before Ed's death, something about Darren had never sat well with me. He forced himself upon our family after the death of my husband. His own brother injected himself into the main artery of our lives. And relatives should be there for grieving family, obviously, but he tried time and time again to go above the call of duty. He continuously turned up at our house to take us for luxurious meals at restaurants, incessantly coaxed the children into letting him sleep over at our home, would manipulate me into agreeing, feeding Nathan primarily with ideas that it would be cruel for them to send me home at such late hour. Sometimes at night, I'd hear footsteps from the hallway, waking a sweat quaking in fear as I wondered whether I'd left my bedroom door ajar, and once I was certain I opened half-sleeping eyes to see a figure sitting on the chair in the corner of the room, but I told myself it had been a dream, one fevered dream of many. Anna, I feebly whimpered, do you know what you just said? Was it true? My daughter loudly shushed me, trying to lift a finger to her lip, but her dozy limb only half cooperated. We don't speak about it. He says he'll hear it if we speak about it. Says he's always listening. Mrs. Carey, the nurse croaked. Should I proceed? I shook my head. I don't know what we should be doing right now. Anna, was this a dream you had? Please tell me this a dream. This, my daughter interrupted, showing a scar on her forearm. This wasn't from the oar. It was from him. My face turned pale as I eyed the faded scar on my daughter's arm. A scar that Darren claimed Anna had acquired from her oar after it hit a rock, causing a large jagged splinter of wood to cut into her flesh. Before the accident, Anna talked. She hadn't been that way for 2 years, but an influx of anesthesia had reopened the soul gates. I saw that in my daughter's tearful eye. She wasn't aware of herself, wasn't aware that she had confessed a dark secret to her own mother. But those words were true, I did not doubt. Mrs. K, Joyce continued, still seeming uncertain as to what she should say or do. I'm going to find my son, I said calmly, standing from the bedside chair. Please watch Anna. My daughter's eyes grew as she finally seemed to identify my face. Mom. I seized her hand and squeezed. Everything's okay, sweetie. Just let Joyce look after you, okay? Right. Everything's okay, the The nurse agreed weakly, as if I'd said the words for her benefit. I'll do those tests now. I rushed into the corridor and battled forwards, but I was so lost in my thought, so lost in the laces of my converse, that I didn't lift my head until I'd almost stumbled into the row of blue plastic chairs at the end of the hallway. "Mum," Nathan gasped, swiveling in his seat to look at me. "What's wrong?" I'd been frightened to look ahead, too frightened to wear a fake smile and act as if all were well. But there was something far more frightening about seeing my son sitting alone in the middle of the row. It was, of course, a blessing to know that I could snatch his hand and scoot him away without facing his questioning uncle, but it terrified me nonetheless. After all, Darren had gone somewhere. "Mum, slow down," Nathan pleaded, attempting to wriggle out of my handhold as I rushed toward Anna's room. I was ready to tear my daughter out of her bed, regardless of the nurse advising. "Sorry, Nathan," I panted as I shoved the door open, "but I didn't finish that though." The recovery room was alarmingly quiet. Anna's segment, semi-partitioned from the rest by a thick curtain of green fabric, was the only lit section of the large area. One solitary fluorescent light hummed loudly above my daughter's bed, the only sound in the room, and my daughter had been left unattended. I rushed over to her bed and asked, "Where's Nurse Joyce?" Anna looked at me with teary eye. "She's here." Rather than unpacking that, I pulled the duvet off her robed body. "We're going home now, Anna. Come on, Nathan, and I will help you stand." My son lifted his half-conscious sister with his shoulder under her arm, and I ran around to the other side of the bed. But before I managed to grab Anna from the left-hand side, I slipped, trained soul squeaking unbearably on the tiles below. Fortunately, my hand reflexively reached outward and gripped onto the green curtain for security. I didn't want to look down, and when I did, I wish I hadn't. There, starting to stain the lower half of my white Converse, was a pool of red, a spreading pool that flooded underneath the partitioning section. This wasn't pulled so far across before, I thought, rubbing the fabric between my shaky finger. I only noticed my brain wanted a distraction from the horror of wading through a shallow pool of red. "Mum," Nathan asked as he helped Anna stand on the other side, "what happened?" I answered not with words, but with heavy breathing, and I lifted my stinking eye to the curtain, eye that if they had been allowed would have been closed, but I had to do it just as I had to look down. I knew what I would find. I tore the curtain backward to reveal, once again, the blackened side of the room, the 5 shadowy bed with unlit light fixtures above. I don't remember whether I screamed, as something in my terrified soul disconnected when I saw what lay on the neighboring bed: the lifeless body of Nurse Joyce. Her face, arm, and scraps were drenched with thick layers of blood. Her mouth hung open in a final cry, and her eyes gone. Gone not in the sense that they had been clawed to ribbons, but in the sense that they had been plucked cleanly from their socket. 2 deep, blood-filled cavities filled her skull. I turned to my children, and I was thankful that Anna's vacant eyes were staring at the corner of the room. However, Nathan saw Joyce's body, in spite of my effort to stand in the way, and he began to cry, began to buckle under the weight of supporting his sister, for fear had taken his body. "Look at me, both of you," I cried, nearly slipping in the blood a second time as I rounded the edge of the bed. "Please." Nathan bawled as I tried to sling Anna's right arm over my shoulder, hoping to escort both of my children out of that nightmare, but my daughter shrugged me off. Before I said a word, Anna pointed a shaking finger at the far corner of the room, pointed at something past the darkened bed. I think she might have tried to say something out of her tissue-filled mouth, some jumbled, muffled word, but she seemed even less coherent than before, and when I turned, I saw something worse than Joyce's body. There was just enough light to illuminate the vague outline of the room. the curtain drawn back to the wall, revealing the full stretch of the room. The four empty bed and a fifth bearing the nurse's mutilated corpse. It was all made slightly clearer thanks to the window at the end of the room, a long glass pane which allowed a smidge of moonlight into the room, onto the far corner near the sixth bed at which Anna was pointing. I saw the outline of an armchair partially visible in the dark bed, and a dark, featureless head rising above the backrest. Somebody was sitting there watching us. He wriggled out like a cold fish as his lungs filled with water. Came Darren's voice from the blackness, but I kept one of his ears above the surface, Cynthia. That way, you see, he could hear me explain in great detail all of the beautiful things I was going to do to you. Run! I shrieked at my children as the sheep lunged forwards. There came the crying of my son, the door handle squeaking downward, and the shoe soles hurriedly beating against the floor, loudening as something invisible charged toward me. There is no horror quite like knowing that something in the dark approaches, a horror that fixed me to the ties, left me helplessly eyeing my oncoming fate. Darren hauled at me, a heavy-set man with a bulging gut and eyes to match, and I was struck so rigidly with his animalistic gaze, which only preyed before it, that I barely noticed the searing pain in my gut. It came, of course, when the adrenaline started to wear off. It was always meant to be else, the man told me, his scentless breath stinging my eyes as he hovered an inch away from me. Realization hit once the terror abated, the terror of trying and failing to smell his breath, inhuman breath, neither stale nor rosy. But that was Darren. He was nothing, just an empty vessel, and I'd always known that. Somehow, just never had any proof until that dreadful day. I realized as my abdomen started to throb that my brother-in-law had thrusted something into me. Sharp steel buried in my flesh, and I would later learn just shy of puncturing my lung. Then Darren lifted his free hand to my hair and brushed it off my ear as he continued to twist the knife deeper into my gut. Some practiced idea of what it means to be human, something he'd seen me do to Anna, I think. And that in itself made me feel sicker, reminded me that this creature before me was no person. It propelled me through, motivated me as Darren continued to talk, to plunge my quaking finger into the back pocket of my jean. Don't worry about this, the man whispered, motionless at the blade in my belly. I'll take you home now, quietly, and I'll get you fixed up. Then I'll look after you, baby. I'll tend to you, care for you, just as I have for the past 2 years, looking after you so much better than my weak, pathetic excuse for. Halfway through the man's monologue, powered by the last tracks of adrenaline and blood in my fading body, I punched the makeshift weapon forward, a set of keys that I wielded between my 2 middle fingers. And I did not choose a fatal mark. I intended to put the man down. The keys met Darren's jugular, and his flapping lips froze mid-sentence. Then my husband's killer released his gripping hand, leaving the knife in my gut, and moved it toward his bleeding neck, trying to cover the wound as he stumbled backwards, spluttering specks of blood. I moved with the body as he pulled away, fearing what would happen if I were to lose that opportunity. I jabbed those keys into his jugular repeatedly, intending to inflict as much damage as possible. Intending to stop Darren from ever hurting my family again. I didn't want him to rot in prison, as I knew I would forever live in terror of him finding me again. The next time, he wouldn't have kept me alive to do as he wished with me. He would have ended me. Above all else, I wanted Darren to drown as Ed had drowned, worse in fact, as he drowned in his own blood. The authorities say I stabbed Darren 46 times, led his neck a mangled mound of skin and blood. He was pronounced dead before the police even arrived on the scene. Responders called by Dr. Radis, who had dialed 999 as soon as my children found him in a nearby corridor. He did, of course, rush to Darren's aid. Such was his oath. That was why I didn't show that there would be no salvaging him. You see, I knew that it would never end. Not really. I will always hear, as I lie in my room at night, Darren's unholy confession of what he did to the love of my life. Hear an unspoken confession of what he was going to do to me. So that was the tale, which was insane, but also well written. Again, massive shout out to the Eagle Strikes. Check out his page on Reddit, and I will see you all later.